Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Future of Work webcast here on ChangeNerd. Today, we are lucky enough to have a special guest to talk with us today. It is Isaias Zamaripa. He is the Vice President of Diversity and Talent Acquisition Strategy for Kaleidoscope and also the owner of a consulting firm called 3 Degrees from Isaias. Isaias, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it.
Great. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And so today we're going to explore deeply this idea of the connection of talent acquisition and the future of work, and really double down on how do we enable our organizations to really be even more inclusive. And I know you're a real expert in this arena in your experience with Darden and other organizations. And so maybe let's start the conversation with how can we really help leaders to be better stewards of creating a more inclusive environment or more inclusive culture?
I think to start out with, you got to start out with the data. I mean, you got to tell them the story of where are they at today. Look at the representation at different levels of the company. Look at their hiring practices and who gets hired, who gets interviewed, who turns down your offers. And then try to understand inside of your company, not only what does your pipeline look like, but where's your leaky bucket? Where are people leaving? And you can't do that as a conglomerate. So it's more about how do you really break down by function, by level, and by ethnicity. So now I can look at a data of any company and say, wow, you don't have a single African-American that's an engineer out in the plant that can become a manager today. You don't have a single Hispanic in brand marketing that is a manager today that can become a director in the next 3 years. Wow, you don't have any woman representation at the director level, next line VP. So then you can see these issues and then actually create a program or a strategy to really go after where you have your Achilles tendon, as you would call it. The second thing that I try to get people to understand is really it's what's your brand? And it's not only what's your brand out in the workforce and then when you're trying to find people, but what's your candidate experience? What do they feel when they come in? How are they treated? From the moment someone called them up to the moment they screened their resumes, does it take another month to then talk to another human being? And after talking to the next human being, does it take another month without hearing from them to then be brought in for an interview? And then after that, so you've got to really put yourself in the perspective of how is that candidate experiencing the recruiting process? And I think that's when changes start to occur. But the data tells you the story.
Yeah, that's so interesting because, for decades now, we've been really thinking about customer data and splicing and dicing sort of where is our market penetration with regards to customers. And yet somehow it doesn't seem like we're following that same logic when it comes to employees and it comes to driving up the amount of inclusion within our organizations. And I love the notion that you are talking about where we really want to be sort of data whisperers. And then the other thing is that we want to make sure that we're very clear about the candidate experience and what that means within our organizations.
And I think part of the focus and getting people to create a more inclusive environment is understanding what happens when you do finally find that diverse candidate. I think a lot of the issues out there in companies, they think by finding the diversity, they've accomplished the goal. And that's just step one. Step two is to onboard and retain. And so you've got to look at that employee like a customer. How do they feel? How are they being engaged? Do they feel that their voice is being heard? Do they feel that they can bring their whole self to the company at work? And I think that's when you really start to talk about an inclusive environment. And that's where, as I've told you before, you talk about diversity as being invited to the party, right? And then inclusion is being asked to dance. But the problem, as I say, is that the music is still the same. So you're still asking us to dance to the same music that's been playing for the last 50 years. So to be successful, you can only dance this way. And that's the rules, the regulations, the past behaviors. And that's where the problem happens in inclusion. You haven't changed the music. So you've got to start to rate, grow, and develop people differently. At the core of diversity and inclusion, it's how do I treat people differently to create equity? And in most people, which is the managers that manage most of the workforce, that's cognitive incongruence to some degree. So to treat you the same, I've got to treat you different. And that's what you've got to attack. How do you teach managers at the middle of the company, which manages most of the people, how to really treat people differently to create equity? How do you bring out different skill sets that you haven't had? And that's the hardest part of this diversity journey.
Yeah, and it's that cognitive dissonance that you're talking about, that it's sort of makes it difficult for us to think about, well, if I have, in order to make sure that it's equitable, I have to treat you differently. So give me an example of what that might look like in practice as a leader. How might I demonstrate that?
I mean, I think the first thing is look at your people that directly report to you, and then whether you're rating them or not, it's a block 9 or whatever it may be. You see people that are down here, and then the top performers are over here. If everybody over here looks the same as you, you've got a problem. So that's your first red flag. The second part you got to realize is, why are the people that are in the middle are always in the middle? So you believe you have this phantom pipeline, but they're never getting to the top right to get the next promotion.
Right.
So you've got this diversity cadre of people that have become managers for the last 15 years, while other people come in and they're gone within 5 to become directors. So you really got to understand, to change that, you've got to change your definition of good. You've got to start to treat people differently and expand their background, giving them stretch assignments, giving them cross-functional assignments. There's a lot of blockers in this system. So how do you really develop a strategy for your diversity, both diverse and women, to then make it up to that next level? If you're not consciously doing this, it's going to fall down and you're going to go back to your old behavior. And at the key of all this is, I'm able to predict people behavior that look like me and act like me and have learned like me. People that are different, I don't know how they're going to act. So I'm a little scared of bringing them up. And that's what really happens when I think it's not as inclusive, and the data shows it.
Yeah.
So you really got to put yourself to expand that definition of good. Have those hard conversations with those people in the middle to say, for you to move up here, these are the things I want you to do. But also, my God, why haven't I paid attention that they're doing this or doing that, or they're bringing something else differently into this discussion?
Yeah, it's so interesting, because the notion of changing our definition of what good looks like, or what good enough looks like, is kind of scary for people. And so is what you're talking about saying, well, hey, we know we want to reach this goal, but how you get there, as long as there's not dead bodies in the wake, it might be different, but we want you to take that journey, or maybe help us define what does good look like, based on your experience and your life experience.
It's really, again, understanding that, the book that reads, what got you there yesterday is not going to get you there tomorrow. So that's the essence. You keep promoting the same people, and you're able to predict their behavior, and they move the way you want, and you get quick decisions, but you're still getting the same results. It's by bringing in different people that creates innovation, creates the ability to come up with different ideas, but it also creates more problems. It's harder to manage. It's harder to retain. And that's the problem that comes with diversity that people aren't willing to say. It is much harder to manage a more diverse group, but the results are long. It takes longer to make decisions. But again, what decisions are you putting in that group? Simple decisions, go do it simple, but strong decisions that have to do with the company, you do want someone that looks different inside of that table to make that decision around you. If everybody around you thinks like you and acts like you, get a decision quick, but you're still getting the same results. And that's the part that you really see the ROI of diversity. But it takes time, and it takes management, and it takes the ability to really manage a different way, and to expand your definition of good, which is one of the things that most companies don't do.
Yeah, it's so interesting too, because I feel like there's this uh, there's this dichotomy here that we're in this new kind of world of work, and yet we're trying to manage and lead teams in the way that we did when you and I probably got started working, in the 80s or the 90s. And so that doesn't make a lot of sense. And so we have to really be able to shift how leaders operate, and really think about how they're going to lead their teams. It almost feels like there needs to be some shift in focus about what is the job of a leader in the future of work, and in a diverse and inclusive environment.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. One of the biggest skills we talk about is when we talk about the leaders of the future is really how are you becoming an inclusive leader? And it's not about being aware of your unconscious bias. That's the big, humming word that everybody says, well, if we teach unconscious bias, well, not about being unconscious bias. It's about being conscious inclusive. So how do you consciously include people? How do you look around the room and say, who's missing? How do you start to look around your actions and your behaviors of how you're excluding people, or microaggressions, or so being very conscious of everything you do and what you do and how you do it, that you then realize that you're actually pushing people away.
Yeah.
So there's a very big part of this is self-reflection and looking in the mirror.
Yeah, it's funny, I've done a number of these conversations, and one of the things that comes up over and over again is that in order for us as individuals to get prepared for this future of work and be successful in it, we have to be reflective, right? We have to be able to kind of look in the mirror and say, how did I do? Or how would I do that differently? Or what does that interaction mean?
And I think on the other side, I think the employee has to also take responsibility for it. How do I ask, what does good mean for you? What am I doing that's not showing you that I'm good? What do I need to accomplish? And then you've got to give them the latitude to do it differently. Because not only do we want them to do something, but we want them to do it the same way, in the same process, because that's how we want to do it. And that keeps giving the same result. So how do you give people leeway to do things differently? I think that's important. And then there's a cultural thing. I think when you look at Latinos, for example, they have the attitude of lo que Dios manda, what God wants. So I'm going to put my head down, work real hard, and someone's going to come and tap me on the shoulder and go, it's time to get promoted. That doesn't happen. So you've got to start to learn how to go out there and self-market and understand the rules of the game. But at the same time, the managers also have to say, let me pull out and ask, what are you doing right? Just because someone's not self-promoting doesn't mean they're not good. So it's got to be both sides. Not one can do it all. It's got to be both sides. I'm not blaming everything on the managers. I think the employees themselves have to change the way they're doing things. And as you know, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. So you've got to be able to be squeaky. And you got to be able to also understand, is this the right culture for me? Is this the right place I need to be? I'm doing a training course in the next month here in Minneapolis for the SHIP, Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, and we're talking about personal development. And when I talk about personal development, this is not a class you take and you're ready. This is something you're going to be doing for the rest of your life. And how do you commit to that? And that's how you start to really change the conversations and making the impact. You've got to be consciously including yourself. You got to be consciously branding yourself. You got to be consciously networking and understanding the rules of the game.
Yeah. So it feels like it's a little bit that notion of, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And the other thing that it makes me think of is this whole employee engagement. And one of the things that we hear a lot about is that employee engagement is broken, and it's low all over the world. And it feels like for a long time that conversation has been very one-sided, right? As an employee, like, engage me,
right.
Where you've got to put in some effort. So it sounds like it's a little bit of a similar journey that we're going through with regards to diversity and inclusion. And so how can we really help connect or increase the likelihood that inclusion is going to increase business results or organizational results?
Mhm. I think you've got to be able to start with the concept of here we're at today and where are we at tomorrow. So really trying to measure the impact of bringing in diversity. And more than likely what you're going to see is there's going to be a dip in performance. That's what the data shows when you bring in a very diverse group. But over the long run, then they start to work better and they actually outperform the homogeneous group. I mean, this is data that's been out there for a while. I think part of why it's not done is because you don't start with the end result in sight. So I think, hey, if we're really going to increase different market penetrations in different markets, if we're going to create more innovative products because I'm bringing different people, let's start to measure them and let's see where they go and let's see where we go and where does that take us. I think the other thing that happens too is the employee resource groups can become a great resource, not only for the brand of the company, both for recruitment and onboarding and retention, but it's the ability to say, are these employee resource groups really incubators of the future leaders of the company? Because a lot of companies will do the ERGs and it's more of a checkoff. Yeah, I'm doing ERGs and it's going great, but you're not really seeing, okay, do the leaders of the ERGs actually get promoted quicker? Do the leaders of the ERG or the people of the ERGs, are they more engaged? You know, and that's the data that then becomes really relevant. Do I use the ERG leadership as a personal development for people and we work it through their boss and their HR people and we get them to get leadership opportunities before in the career that they would have? And that also gives them exposure to upper management, which is one of the things diversity candidates usually don't get. So being strategic with your ERGs as a future incubator of leaders and as a way to develop your people of color, that's how ERGs get used. And then that's how ERGs can become an innovative. They can help with recruiting. They can help with marketing. They can help with the communities that we're trying to serve. And you've got to get out of that little box of, well, the ERGs just do this. The ERGs just, you know, are going to have their Hispanic Heritage Month, Black History Month, Asian Lunar Year, you know, whatever it is. And that's all they do. And you'll see I think, you know, in every website, every company is great in diversity. But when you get there, that's when the real test comes. Do you see that the leaders are actually moving up? Do you see that their impact, or are you coming in there and saying, okay, now you got to act this way to be accepted and to move up?
Yeah, that's an interesting concept too, because I feel like, you know, the notion of the corporate ladder, right? That's sort of passé now, and this whole idea of, Josh Beerson calls it the corporate or the career lattice. And so it's funny, right, that we have to make sure that we're thinking about how can people drive their careers, and how do we grow the organization for everybody, right? And
Right.
enable that. And so it also feels like it's not enough just to talk about it and to put things in place, but we want to take these tools and really use them to drive the business forward.
Yeah. It all has to do with impact to the business and ROI. I mean, sometimes people get caught up with it's the right thing to do. You know, it's more about how does this impact the business? How is this going to make me a better employer? How is this going to increase my ability to retain people? How is this going to be able to actually create an impact in the marketplace? How is this going to help me reach different communities that I haven't been able to reach or get different insights? So it's really looking at those 5 pillars of diversity, which is the workforce, the workplace, the marketplace, the community, and supplier diversity. Seeing those 5 pillars, that's where you look at where diversity is making the impact.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like you said, I think that we want to be able to say in those 5 areas, where do we want to be? And what's that, how's that going to change our market strategy and our penetration in different areas and our growth and all those sorts of things. So I'm curious about, as we're kind of thinking about leveraging technology and processes, how can we leverage technology or better process to really double down on or increase the level of diversity and inclusion?
I think it's, again, when you start to put those filters into the AI strategy, how are you sure that you're trying to be as inclusive as possible? Are you getting the associations or the groups that can identify diversity? Are you really going to companies that are heavy in diverse slates or diverse employees? Because if you do this strategy and pull out, and then you even have less diversity than when you started with, then the AI is not going to be as impactful. Now, at what level are you doing this is the other part. I think AI is great for the high repeatable jobs, entry-level jobs, the manufacturing jobs. But as you move up the ladder for the managers and the directors, you still can use AI, but I think there's another part that you've got to go out and physically say, I need to find people that look different and have different backgrounds and are coming from different industries. So it's taking that, not using the excuse that AI can give me all these answers. I think AI is a great process at the lower level and at the high level jobs that are repeatable. But I don't think as you move up the ladder that you want to use AI as much. I would be more on the old fashioned, let's network, let's develop a brand, let's really focus on who are the best candidates out there, who's leading the industry in this analysis, and really being able then to bring in the best candidates in the marketplace.
Yeah, and just like I think in everything, technology doesn't solve every problem. And it feels like we want to use technology so that we can bring in the right candidates in for those right roles, but that we also want to institute some really good process and networking to really identify candidates that are going to be in pools that we may not necessarily be swimming in right now.
Right. Yeah, and if you go to the old-fashioned way of going to a conference and going to a university and putting up a booth, that's the problem with most of the companies. They think by doing that, you've checked the mark of going out to diversity. But all the work needs to be done ahead of that. So when we would go to companies and work with them, it's like, no, you've got to be, 6 months before, a year before, understanding who's there at that university or at that diversity conferences. What are the chapters or the organizations that you want to be networking with already? What's your brand? Do they know about you? How do you talk about your story? And then who ends up being there on the floor? They want to look at people that look like them and get hired by them. And it's more about having all that work done before you even show up. So if you have 100 interviews set of phone screens and hiring managers, and when you go to the conference, you're bringing in hiring managers that can make offers on the floor, that's how you make an impact. It's not just showing up at the conference. And that's the problem. I checked it, I'm at the conference, and now the process is recruiting and diversity will bring me paper, and a month later I'll look at the paper, and a month later I'll bring in a candidate, and a month later maybe I'll get an opportunity to hire. The best candidates are gone.
Right.
And then you end up hiring not good candidates, and then you start throwing the baby with the bathwater. Well, I brought in these candidates from these conferences and they're not being successful. Well, because you ended up getting the people that were still around 4 months later. You need to get them before. You need to develop relationships with them before. I mean, early identification of talents, of diversity for internships. I mean, the right companies have 2 and 3 internships with that same candidate. Who do you think they're going to go work for when they're going to get hired? It's the candidate, it's a company that he summers with.
It's interesting because it's actually pretty similar to any other really good talent acquisition process where, you're going to go to those particular areas of interest and you're going to make an investment of time and resources and really woo that person or those people to make a case to come and work for your organization. Um, so, so if we kind of shift gears a little bit and think about retention, right? So we brought people in the door,
Right.
The bucket's full.
Yeah.
How do we make sure that we're shoring up the bottom of the bucket, or whatever, the side of the bucket, whatever it is?
Well, because I think that's where the reality starts. I've been to companies that they're so focused on the mousetrap, on how are we going to find people and get. That's not the issue. We can find them. Are you going to retain them and grow them? And that's when you're being deliberate about their careers. You're walking them through of what is your next steps. Here's your rating. Being very transparent with all that. A lot of companies don't do that. I think especially with diverse candidates that again are getting called on the phone, every other month on other jobs, and they can look and, oh wow, there's 5 jobs in my area. The moment they don't feel that they're being heard or being groomed or being mentored, they're out the door. So the companies that are doing the best at really retention, they're being intentional in telling a story of where are you going from here? How are we going to get there? What are we going to train you? Who's going to mentor you? Who's going to sponsor you? What are the skill sets you need? And we're going to be very transparent to get from point A to point B, and then from point B to point C. Be very transparent in how to get there inside of your corporation. The companies that spend that time with those candidates are the ones that are going to retain the folks.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of candidates that end up leaving and they don't know that they're being rated highest and they were going to get a promotion, but they've already out the door because nobody ever tells them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that whole notion of, right, really being transparent as much as possible. And it's interesting because I did some work with a client just recently that was in that same boat, right? Not necessarily for diversity, but for engineering. And they literally had to build a program to showcase over the course of the next 2 to 3 years. How are these folks going to grow? What are they going to learn? What are their opportunities? What are the investments? Where can they go? What other opportunities are available in the organization? And that is really a powerful message to say, hey, it's not just that we want you to come work here, because we do, but we want you to make an impact and make a difference here. And so
we're committed to your work. We're committed to your ability to be successful. We're committed to you being knowing that we're taking care of you and that we want to grow you. That's the best companies that are doing that. You hit it right on the nose.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because this conversation is sort of full circle in that we do that with customers, right? That notion of it is more beneficial, it is better cost, you get more profit out of customers that have been with you for a long time than bringing in new customers. And so I think it's that, right, that sort of inside out alignment, right? However it is that we're treating our customers and gaining new markets and really looking to gather that, we want to do that internally.
Yeah. And you see that when you lose an employee and then got to fill it, the money you lose and the training you lose and the impact you lose is enormous. So you've got to figure out how you, not only do you do it for the top group, but how do you do it for that medium group that's still going to be good performers? And how do you motivate them and keep them engaged and keep them saying you're making an impact and you're trying to grow, and here's what we're going to do. Here's the training. Here's the development. Here's some exposure. Here's some cross-functional expertise. Here's a stretch assignment. And you've got to be intentional. You can't leave it. And on the other side, you've got to teach those employees how to ask for that and how to get that feedback and how to expand their horizons on what they want to do. Most people are just so busy working that they're not really looking at what they want to do long term. And they end up going down a different route that then excludes them from the opportunity that they really want.
Yeah. Yeah. And they don't know how to get back there.
Right.
I think that's interesting.
And then you pigeonhole. Then they think of you, oh, he's only an individual contributor. Oh, he's only wants to do this, versus where you really want to be, because you haven't told anybody and nobody's asked you. So it's both things got to happen at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to that whole notion of it's a two-way street.
Yeah.
Right? We've got to make sure that communication's there. So Just a couple other questions that I'm curious about. So the first is, as you think about the future of work, right? If you kind
Mhm.
of look in your crystal ball 5, 10 years out into the future, what are the things that you feel like are the biggest challenges or that you're most concerned about?
I think the biggest thing is how to work remotely. I think for me, the companies that really figure that out and can manage people remotely and give the opportunity for people to work from home and work from anywhere. This weekend I want to go to Paris. This weekend I want to go to New Orleans. Yeah, work from 8 to 5. I don't care where you're at. That's a very different attitude. I mean, I've heard people saying, "How can I manage someone if they're not here in the office?" So that's again that skill set that you've got to change. And the ability for people to do work remotely is probably one of the biggest, I think, brands that you could get for a company to say, come here and do your work. You want to work from midnight to 5 and have the day off? Do that. If you're able to do what we're expecting you to do in those 5 hours when nobody's here, and when we have meetings, you've got to be present. So, there's ways around it. There's ways to set it up. There's ways to be successful. And there's been different companies that have tried it and kind of gone in and out and then I think that's what you got to figure out is what's the culture of your company, what's the responsibilities of the job. And that's the same thing I talked about. How do you treat people differently? For some functions they can do that, other functions they have to be in the office because of meetings or organizations, whatever. So don't have to do everything for everybody the same. You get caught up on that. Well, how can this group have 3 days, of working from home when this group can only do one? Well, because that's their function and that's their job and it's tied to their job. And having that clarity of doing that, I think, is also important. You're not treating people differently. It's based on the job and your responsibilities. I think that's probably one of the biggest ones. The other one I think is really, are you feeling that you're making an impact? Are you feeling that you're fulfilling, the whole picture of you as a human being? Hey, is my company giving back to the communities I am interested in? Is my company doing supplier diversity in the way I want to do it? Is my company creating a product that I'm proud of? I mean, those are the things that I think will not make people go to a job, but those are the things that'll make people stay in a job longer. If you're very manufacturing and you're not tied to anything or no product, etc., then you can go get another job doing the same thing. Uh, I think the companies that really make their mission and vision clear and the impact that that person has, they're the ones that are going to win with the best talent. Not only will they have the best talent, they'll also retain the talent.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting too, because I think that with all the opportunity out there, it's so important for us in our work lives to really understand what's the impact that I'm having in the organization, to the end customer, to the people around me, right? So there's that dance of really being able to connect the work I'm doing to driving, gaining and retaining customers at some level.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And do you see that is a challenge that in the clients that you work with and the organizations that you've worked with in the past? Do you see that sort of tying my work to impact is that something that is a challenge for some organizations?
I think it's getting people to realize, like you said, understanding the customer, understanding the candidate, understanding the employee of why should they stay there. It's being that self-reflection of what is it that I'm giving them other than money, opportunity, growth. But am I doing anything else regarding their family situation, regarding their kids, regarding their older parents? There's all these other issues that are starting to come that takes employees out of the office and they got to take care of it. So how do I deal with that in an equitable situation for everybody, but also giving the ability for people to do different things at different times?
Yeah.
I think it's kind of being reactive to the needs of your employees versus the other way around. It's turning that matrix around so that it's the company finding out, what do you need? How can I make your job better? How can I keep you? Because the companies that keep their people are the ones that are going to be successful. the high turnover occurs and those leaky buckets occur in a function because people don't feel that they're going to move up, or people don't feel that the company's taking care of them, or people see the writing on the wall, God, this group's going to get laid off, you know? So I think you've got to really take that perspective of focus on the employee more by developing their career, developing their mission and their vision for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah,
And how well
that's,
does that correlate with the company's mission and vision?
yeah. No, that's amazing that those two things are so important, right? That idea of how do we create a flexible workforce so that we're optimizing people's time, their efforts, and then how do we make sure that we're allowing people to bring their whole selves to work by taking care of their whole person, right? I mean, I love that notion because I think it really speaks to this idea of creating an inclusive environment. Because if I'm expected or I'm asked to bring my whole self to work, I'm bringing, you know, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so we've got to make sure that we've got processes and things in place to help employees and support employees, whatever they're going through.
Right, right.
It's awesome. Well, Isaiah, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate the in-depth conversation. And I'm hoping that maybe next year, this time, we can kind of check back in and sort of see where we're at, see if the conversation
See
has
what I
shifted
said
a little bit.
actually still is relevant, or see what I said was way off.
Right? Prognostication. I love it. So right on. Well, I would love to have you on again. And I think it's a great conversation about how do we really ensure that we're creating an inclusive workforce across the organization. So thanks again to Isaiah Zamaripas. And I am Anil Saxena, your humble master of ceremonies here on the Future of Work webcast on ChangeNerd. Don't forget to check out ChangeNerd's premium option, where you get to see some of the behind the scenes webcasts, get access to more education, and some of our mastermind groups. Again, if you want to leave me a message or contact me for any reason, you can do it here on ChangeNerd, at LinkedIn, or go to my website at www.cube214.com. Thanks a lot, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Bye-bye.